Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Uruguay. Uruguay, as you can see, is a very small country, so this will be a quick geography. Then we'll do history, and then we'll flip through this book where I'll show you a lot of really cool pictures and facts and things about Uruguay. It's a really interesting country. It's one of those that during my research I was like, uh-oh, I'm in love. I want to visit. I want to see everything. It sounds wonderful. Mainly due to, you can see this very long coastline. Uruguay has some really excellent beaches and lots of really beautiful beach towns and cities. The biggest and best apparently is Punta del Este, which is right about here. And as you can see, the capital city of Montevideo is also located along the ocean there. Uruguay has lots of little islands too. I think there's pictures in here. One is a big sea lion colony, which is really cool. Another was used as an island prison, which is abandoned, and it looks so much like Alcatraz near where I live. It's really neat. Not when it was in operation, but we'll talk about that in its history. You can also see right here the Rio de la Plata is bordering Uruguay. And I know it's called the Rio, as in river, but it's technically not a river. It's more of an estuary or a bay of some kind, I suppose. It's hard to tell, but it's been called Rio de la Plata or Silver River since colony times, so it's stuck. There's a lot of rivers also in Uruguay. You can see right here, this is the Rio Uruguay. It flows out into the Rio de la Plata. This is where the country gets its name from. The Rio Negro is also a very important river that just goes right through the middle of Uruguay, slicing it in half. In the middle right here, almost in like the middle of the country, is a huge lake called the Rio de Rincón del Bonete. It's the largest man-made lake in South America. And the rest of Uruguay is incredibly very flat. The highest point is right about here. You can see this is kind of like a hilly area. Cerro Catedral is the highest point. It's not terribly high, even it's just like a very large hill. But this flat plains area is known as the Pampas. You remember that when I covered Argentina, you can kind of see right here the Pampas, which is a flat, almost kind of like prairie grassland that just dominates this whole section of South America and pretty much is almost all of Uruguay. The Pampas is mostly famous for the gauchos, which is the South American version of the cowboy. So the Pampas is perfect for cattle herding and horses, cows, all those things that cowboys work with, basically. And in a nutshell, that's the geography of Uruguay. That's pretty much it. You can see there's lots of large cities like Paysandú, there's Salto, but the majority of the population lives in Montevideo. It's very sparsely populated. Like the large cities are nothing compared to Montevideo. So let's get into its history, I suppose. The first humans would have lived in Uruguay about 13,000 years ago. There were three big indigenous groups when the Europeans arrived. There were many throughout its history, but the main big ones were the Charrúa, the Chana, and the Guarani. The Guarani are the only ones who are really still around today, but they almost like the whole percentage of Guarani peoples live up in Paraguay, to the north up there. The Chana people were pretty much wiped out by Europeans from disease and things like that. And the Charrúa, very sadly, had a very destructive end, where at one point the government made a point to slaughter the remaining Charrúa peoples in Uruguay. There are none alive that we know of. There are some people of descent of the Charrúa people, but no 100% Charrúa peoples, very sadly. Speaking of the Europeans, the first to arrive would have been the Portuguese. They came by in 1512, and then the Spanish came by in 1516. The indigenous people that they met here were very aggressive and fought back very violently. So it wasn't really settled at first. The Portuguese moved more toward up here. The Spanish moved more over here. Eventually, both powers started to creep into the area. The Spanish started to settle and build farms in the area around 1624, but it was the Portuguese that built the first town. It's around here, so it's called Colonia Del Sacramento. It was established in 1671. Kind of in response to that, the Spanish built Montevideo, and the two powers went back and forth trying to take over this land until the 1800s. In 1811, a man named Jose Artigas led a movement against Spain to push that power out of the area. He worked with Argentina to try to incorporate this area, but there was a lot of disagreement about how this land should be represented. So Artigas went to Montevideo in 1815 and took control and took over the area. The Portuguese responded to that. In 1817, they took over and annexed the territory to Brazil. But Brazil declared its independence in 1822, and a very famous revolutionary named Juan Antonio Larrieja declared independence for Uruguay on August 25th, 1825. They had a war of independence with Brazil that ended in a peace treaty in 1828. During this time, its early years of self-rule, there were two main political parties, the Blancos and the Colorados, which, if you know your Spanish, Blanco means white, Colorado means red. The Blancos were the more conservative party, the Colorados were the more liberal, and they both very much clashed and disagreed over how the country should be ran. This turned into a very large civil war. It's known as the Great War. It lasted from 1839 to 1851. A lot happened during this war. Primarily, Argentina, sensing a moment of weakness, seized Montevideo and held it from 1843 to 1851. The main way that peace and stability came back into the area was from other countries intervening, like Brazil and Britain and France helped out. Eventually it ended in a treaty in 1851. But another war was right around the corner. Paraguay up to the north there was having some very aggressive border disputes. This led to the War of the Triple Alliance. The Triple Alliance being Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. Uruguay got involved because that treaty that they signed to end the Great War included a political alliance with Brazil, that they pretty much had to go along with any political decision Brazil made, so they got involved in the war. It was like by far the most bloody war in South American history. Paraguay got its butt kicked in a big way. You can learn more in my Paraguay video. But in the meantime, over down here in Uruguay, the two political parties were still disagreeing in a big way. There was, for a minute, they tried to share responsibilities, like dividing up the country into certain, like, controlled parts, but neither party could come to an agreement over how that should be ran. It led to more battles, and eventually the military was tired of it, and there was a military takeover from 1875 to 1890. Once that ended and democracy was restored, a new reform movement came, led by the new president, Jose Baye, who decided that, the wartime, we gotta stop doing the wars. Let's focus on the people of Uruguay. Let's focus on the economy. And they did. The economy grew. There were a lot of social reforms, and that led to a lot of stability. That waned-ish during, the Depression. In World War II, it bounced back up when they had a huge export industry, exporting like processed food for the day, lots of canned food and stuff over to Europe. But in the 1950s, the economy tanked. There was a lot of inflation. And, things just were too expensive. People couldn't afford to eat. And as we know from my channel, when people can't eat, the government doesn't do anything, people get angry. And this led to a sort of rebel movement known as the Tupamaros, who were very anti-government and wanted to fight back against Uruguay. This led to a state of emergency being declared from 1968 to 1984. And this was a very, very bad time in Uruguay's history. A lot of people were arrested and never seen again. A lot of people imprisoned for decades. It was just a very, very rough time for the military to take hold in martial law. A very dark time in Uruguay's history. However, in 1984, when democracy was restored, once again, just like before in the 1800s, leading into the 1900s, leading into the 2000s, starting in the 90s, Uruguay became a very progressive country. Again, focusing more on the economy and the actual people living in Uruguay. And for the past 20 years or so, Uruguay has been governed by very socialist leading presidents. Since the early 2000s into the 2010s, Uruguay has legalized things like cannabis and abortion, and they recognize same-sex marriage. And still to this day, Uruguay is a very, very stable country. I really tried to look up any kind of negatives about Uruguay, because all I read were just wonderful things about the people there. Pretty much just the taxes are crazy high because of all of the free healthcare and free education and everything they get. But that's what you get when you have a socialized government. When you have so many free services, someone has to pay for it, so taxes are high. But pretty much that's the only real downside I found to Uruguay. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's flip through this book and look at some pictures of Uruguay. Let's see this one first. Oh, this is in the Independence Square. Some happy kids there. Here we go. There they are. Big smile. We've got the beach. This is in Montevideo. Big old beach, isn't it? And here are some gauchos out on the pampas. This is from a march to legalize cannabis, which was legalized. The beach. Look at this old lighthouse, the shore. Lovely. Here's a map of where Uruguay is located. As I said, I don't really have any good maps of Uruguay. Look at the countryside. It almost reminds you of almost like Britain in a way. It looks like the countryside there in a sense, doesn't it? Like the little lake and the big long roads and the country farmhouse. And then there's the beautiful beaches, which looks more like California to me, but that's just me. So this is in the Independence Plaza. There's that big building. It's a big old park. I think there's a lot of pictures in this book of that place. Some animals. We have the very sweet capybara, the armadillo, the lesser anteater, isn't it cute? And the rhea, which is like the ostrich of South America. Look at this tree. This is an ombu tree, and it looks like it's haunted or has fairies living in it. It looks like something from a Guillermo del Toro movie. It's like Pan's Labyrinth, right? And she crawls through the tree. It looks just like this almost. The same level of creepy. Montevideo. This is in a big park area. And let's see what else we've got. Another shot of the Independence Plaza. There's the big park area right here. An old engraved print of Montevideo. Look at these. This is Guarani people firing on an enemy village with their feet. That's interesting. Here's a drawing by a Jesuit priest of the Guarani people living their daily lives. Looks like they're harvesting some fruits from the trees. This is Colonia del Sacramento, the old town, right? Here's Jose Artigas, who was like the George Washington figure of Uruguay. The city gate of Colonia del Sacramento. And this is a memorial for the Charrúa people. So this talks about Salsipuedes, which is where essentially the last Charrúa people were rounded up and slaughtered very, very sadly. Let's see. Painting by Juan Manuel Blanes. This is a painting showing a moment in history. It's a Juramento de los 33 Orientales, Oath of the 33 Easterners. And these look like the Blancos ready to fight. Here is Jose Payet on a postage stamp. No pictures on this page. Museum of Memory to recognize those who were lost and the horrors that went on during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s in Uruguay. This was the first president of their new democratic era, 1984. It's Julio Maria Sanguinetti. President Tabaré Vázquez, one of those socialist presidents I mentioned, and another very socialist president was José Mujica. He was actually held captive for 15 years, I think it was, during that martial law age. So he definitely had a bone to pick with some government aspects and changed a lot. Yeah, see, here's a march for better taxes. The Palacio Legislativo, the Parliament building. And it says here the senators are talking about legalizing marijuana, which they did. Here is the flag of Uruguay. Let's read about it. The flag of Uruguay was designed and approved in 1830. There are 4 blue stripes alternating with 5 white ones. Those are the colors of Argentina and symbolize Uruguay's connection with Buenos Aires during colonial times. There's also a white patch with the Sun of May emblazoned in gold upon it. The Sun of May has 16 rays that are alternately straight and wavy, symbolizing independence from their Spanish overlords in May 1810. The Sun of May is a symbol in both Argentina and Uruguay and represents Inti, the sun god of the Incas. The flag's design is said to have been influenced by the style of the American flag, which it does kind of look like, doesn't it? Interesting. Here's another picture of Tabaré Vázquez, who one of his changes was to give every student a laptop, like a little learning laptop. You can see there. Here's their money. They use the peso, well, the Uruguayan peso. A gaucho with his cows on his horse, wearing his poncho and his hat. And let me move pencil out the way, hold on. These are some workers in a canned meat factory. Still a big industry in Uruguay. Shipping containers in the port city. Let's see, a protest for, to stop the construction of a paper mill that would cause pollution on the Uruguay River. And here are a lot of cows down here. Riding her bike along the beach. And out in that park, the one I showed you that has the Montevideo little statue thing there. Don't know how to describe it. Here's Montevideo. Very beautiful, very modern city. Here's their airport. Family out for a walk together. And the kind of more poor, slummy area of Montevideo, sadly. Oh, lovely earrings. Oh, she's part of the Gaucha festival. So not gauchos, but gauchas, the female gauchos. Also at the Gaucha festival. Looks like some things for sale there or something. Another picture of Montevideo. And this talks about the gauchos. So here he is with his boots, his hat, his big old belt, his horses. This looks like a women's rights demonstration, yeah, for gender equality. Here's some students working hard in school using those laptops I told you about. A beautiful church right here. Very, very lovely. This is in Mercedes, Uruguay. Basilica of the Holy Sacrament, the oldest church in the country in Colonia Del Sacramento. This really beautiful church in Punta del Este. Doesn't it look like a seaside church? That beautiful blue color. She's working on her spelling, or her handwriting, it says in the caption. This cool welcome sign in all these different languages. That's neat, right by all the shipping containers. Welcome to Uruguay. I need to move the pencil, it's way too loud. There we go. A poster from 1930s. Uruguay. What's this? Oh. Very old man of Gaucho descent. This guy's painting some, looks like paintings of gauchos there. Drumming on Carnival, so they're playing candombe music, which originated from the slaves in the area during its colonial period. The oldest theater, the Teatro Solis, and here are some people dancing the tango. This really cool statue, which is meant to recognize people traveling out to the plains to start farms and start their lives over. This is a writer, Jose Enrique Rodo. And this is a very famous poet. She went by Juana de America. Another famous writer. This is Eduardo Galeano. Wrote a lot about the like dictatorship military era. Out on the beach. Lovely. Here's a big statue in Punta del Este called La Mano. Obviously, big old hand sticking out. It's kind of cool. Playing some football, of course, like very popular sport in this corner of the world. This talks about a very sad event, the miracle of the Andes, where this plane crashed into the mountain. Most of the people there were Uruguayan. And, yeah, there's a movie. Does it talk about the movie in here? Yeah, he's in Alive. That's what it's called. Really sad event, honestly, but there were survivors of that. Cycling in a race. And a recently renovated historic hotel. It says it looks beautiful. Also in Independence Square, you can see Artigas. And aren't these the best ways to find the best clothes? Those kind of street vendors that have all their clothes hung up like that. You always find some gems in there. Another beautiful beach city. This is Periopoles. And here's the island I told you about with the sea lion colony on it. Festivals. Here's the Gaucha Festival. Very cool. That seems like a fun festival, like a fun fair. Speaking of, Carnival, of course, is a very big deal in this part of the world. Rodeo time. This is at Simana Criolla. Like a big rodeo, basically. Food. Lots of veggies for sale. And meat. Meat is a big part of the diet, like grilled meat, barbecued meat, things like that. Yerba mate is drunk here. It's a very herbally, leafy tea, so you have to drink it with this big straw, so you don't drink the leaves. And they're at a barbecue, enjoying some good food. Speaking of, here's a sandwich known as chivito. and some alfajores, which is like dulce de leche little sandwiches. Sounds very yummy. Here's another decent map of Uruguay. I like it because you can see all the departments, and you can see that we've got Artigas, Flores, La Valleja, like named after the like famous revolutionaries of its independence, and then you have Cerro Largo, O 33, another moment from independence. I like that. Very clever. And that's going to be it for tonight. I know it's kind of a shorter video, but Uruguay is a tiny country. Not so much to talk about, but I'll have a video for you tomorrow about Uruguay as well. So be sure to subscribe if you want to make sure you don't miss that. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night.